By my math, it's a Friday. And I did a video recently where I mentioned Bob Lutz. And I knew I had a photograph of myself with Bob Lutz and two other people. And I was poking around on my computer looking for it. And nowadays, you look through old files on hard drives. You used to go through photo albums, but it's the same thing. You're going through pictures and you're seeing stuff and it reminds you of stuff. And next thing you know, you're down some rabbit hole looking at photographs you took years and years and years ago. And I came across a photograph that reminded me of an interesting story. So I wrote a book called Michigan's Columbus, the story of Douglas Houghton. Douglas Houghton was a geologist in Michigan. He was here from about 1830 or 31 through 1845 when he drowned in Lake Superior. And I wrote a book about him. And to do research on somebody that lived that long ago involves a lot of visits to archives, looking for stuff. And I spent a lot of time in the archives in Detroit, the Detroit Public Library. But I also poked around in a couple others, including a few in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But the Ann Arbor Bentley Historic Library had a bunch of really, really good information on him because he was, at one point in time, appointed to the faculty of the University of Michigan after, moved to Ann Arbor, just shortly after that. And so there were papers there and so on that had to do with him. So I was, spending a lot of time at the archives. And one time I was flipping through their stuff. And I was doing this actually online, so I was at home doing this, maybe in my office actually. And I'm flipping through their finding guides of things they have in their collection. And I come across this cryptic single line that says daguerreotype, Douglas Houghton. Now, for those who don't know, daguerreotype is a very, very, very early type of photography. And that would be a photograph taken by such a camera. And very, very old and unusual. And here's the problem, is that the daguerreotype was apparently invented or first being used around 1839 or 1840. And Douglas Houghton died in 1845. So hypothetically, it's possible he sat for a portrait and had his photograph taken. And now here's the thing. I had only found paintings of Douglas Houghton. So this is a famous painting right here of Douglas Houghton. There's actually two copies of this, believe it or not. It's painted by his brother-in-law, Alva Bradish. There's a iteration of that at the state capitol, and it's full size. It's a huge painting. And then there is another copy of it painted by Alva Bradish, who apparently thought, once Houghton died, he's going to make another one of these. And that one is at the Mineral Museum at Michigan Tech. And I've seen that. In fact, I've got a photograph. I'll dig that one out too and post that also. But the idea that there's paintings of him painted by people who knew him, that's nice. We know what the guy looked like, right? And if you could see the bottom half of this, and I'll see to it that I'd show it in a second, is down at his feet is his dog. He had a water spaniel named Meme that used to hang out with him. I'm not sure if it was Meme or Mimi, but it was a native word for, I believe, a pigeon. And that was the name of his dog. But I digress. So there's a reference to the fact that there is a daguerreotype of Houghton at the archive in Ann Arbor. So now I'm thinking to myself, this doesn't seem right because I've never seen a photograph of Houghton. And I'm wondering if this is correct. And now I discovered some things doing research. I found photographs that had never been published before, that kind of thing, in other books I've written. So you're always hoping that you could be the one who found something in a dusty old archive that nobody recognized for its value before. And so there were no published photographs of Houghton that I could find. So I called, because I'm going to have to drive all the way to Ann Arbor to look at this thing. And I asked a research librarian, I said, I'm just curious, according to your description of your holdings, it has a sentence that says, daguerreotype Douglas Houghton. And she goes, yeah, it says that. And she looked it up, and I said, well, there's a real slim possibility that it's real because of the timing and all that, and I've never heard of this. Is there any chance that you can double check this for me to make sure it's real? Because I'm going to drive out there, take a look at it, and if it's real, I want to get copies of it. She goes, hang on. She puts me on hold. About 10 minutes later, she gets back in line. She goes, yep, it's real. She goes, I'm looking at it right now. And she goes, it's in a little holder, and it's a daguerreotype, and it looks like Houghton. And I said, okay, I'll get out there as soon as I can. So I was out there within a day or two, and I said, hi, I'm the guy you called about the daguerreotype of Douglas Houghton. She goes, oh, hang on a second, I'll go get it. Woman goes back. She's wearing the white gloves. She comes walking out holding this daguerreotype, and it's inside one of those presentation cases. It's, I don't know, it's brass or polished of some sort, but it's a really cool presentation case. And she points to a table, and when you're working at the archive, they give you a table. So I sit at the table, and she lays this in front of me. She opens it up. She goes, "There you go. It's a daguerreotype." And I go, "Yes, it is. It's a photograph of a painting." No question. And she's, "What?" I said, "That's not a photograph of Douglas Houghton. That's a photograph of a painting of Douglas Houghton." She goes, "Are you sure?" I said, "Oh, I guarantee you I'm sure. Now, I didn't have a copy of the painting with me, but I looked at this painting often enough. There were 2 portraits, at least, of Houghton that were painted by Elva Bradish, his brother-in-law. And at least one of them was painted during his life, meaning he sat for a portrait. And now there's several versions of those portraits around, and we don't know whether or not he sat more than once, or if he simply sat once and Bradish cranked off copies. And there's another story altogether about Elva Bradish, which I can tell you in a second. But the point is that there is the chair portrait and there is the pictured rocks portrait. And those are 2 different paintings generally that we're familiar with. But the chair portrait, there's a version of that at the Geological Society in Lansing. There's a version of it at the Detroit Historical Society collection in Detroit. And there's another version of it at the Portage Lake District Library in Houghton, Michigan. And there's probably others out there. However, somebody took that portrait, sat it down, and took its picture with a daguerreotype. We just don't know when or why or who or what, but that daguerreotype then got placed in the collection at the archive, and somebody said, "Hey, that's Douglas Houghton. That's a daguerreotype of Douglas Houghton." And it's sort of, but it's actually a daguerreotype of a painting of Douglas Houghton. So it was pretty cool. I had to break the news to the woman. I said, "I got news for you. This is not a daguerreotype of him. It's of a painting of him. But because it's in black and white, it looks cool. But it's not a daguerreotype of him, which we would love to have, but we don't have." So I have to tell you as a side note to the story that Elva Bradish was Douglas Houghton's brother-in-law, and he was a painter. And he was pretty good. He was not a master, but he was pretty good. And he sold paintings. And what he specialized in doing, apparently, was in Detroit in the 1830s and 40s, was approaching rich people and saying, "Would you like your portrait? Maybe of your wife, maybe of the 2 of you together." And the reason I know this is that at the archive, they have all kinds of correspondence. And I found all the correspondence. I looked up Houghton. I looked up Bradish. I looked up other people who would have known each other back then. And it turns out there's a lot of documentation and correspondence for all these different people. And I found some very interesting stuff. For instance, Douglas Houghton's brother had been involved in the search for Douglas Houghton himself when he drowned because he had been nearby and heard word that his brother was in a boat that had capsized. And I actually held in my hands and read the letter that Jacob wrote to his parents explaining the circumstances of Douglas's death. And it was extremely, I can't even describe it, what it was like to hold that letter, because it was handwritten in the old style, with probably, old style quill pen and, beautiful handwriting on this big piece of paper that was then folded up into a letter and sent to his parents. And his parents, I'm not sure who got it, but somebody got it, and it wound up in these papers at the archive. Unbelievable to hold that letter. But I found a collection of papers that had to do with Elva Bradish. And Elva Bradish, his correspondence contained all these letters from people saying, "Dear Mr. Bradish, thank you so much for your kind offer to do portraits of myself or my wife. However, at this time, we do not have time for such a thing, but we will seek you out in the future. Rest assured. Thank you very much." And it'd be signed by some guy. And I'd take that letter and go, that's interesting. I put it aside, pull out the next letter. "Dear Mr. Bradish, thank you so much for your kind offer." Not only were all these letters created, but he apparently saved them all. And I don't know if it's because he was going to then follow up and see if he could get this job down the road or not, or if he simply saved him because he was a pack rat. But there was a bunch of letters from, I'm guessing, rich people in Detroit turning him down for his kind offer to paint their portraits. So, like I said, he was a pretty good painter, but like I said, he also was not a master. I've looked before to see if his paintings pop up at auctions, and they do. They do, and they're surprisingly affordable considering how old they are. But again, at the archive in Ann Arbor is a daguerreotype of a painting of Douglas Houghton. And boy, was I excited for about a day and a half. So there you go. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.